the NFL, but appealed that decision and has now won back his right to play.
And running back for the Minnesota Vikings, Adrian Peterson, pleaded no contest to recklessly assaulting his son. He was fined, put on a probation, and deactivated from the team.
Vincent, I want to ask you, how much responsibility do you think the NFL should have for the actions of its players?
Well, it's twofold. You know, if I worked at McDonald's, I wouldn't expect them to get into my lifestyle. You know, the NFL is a corporation, and it's hard to hold them accountable for what their players do.
Right.
You know, they can't control them after Sunday night. Lights are off. They can't control what they do. But I will say, as far as domestic violence, especially in the Ray Rice incident, as a police officer, had I done that, my career is over. You know,
Right,
I can't carry a gun. I can't get traded to another department. You know, I can't go to another team.
Right.
So I think for that, when you invite Ray back, it sends a bad message to women in general. And, you know, I watched that video and I looked at it and I said, you know, this isn't the first time this happened between those two. You know, you don't just wake up after 28 years and decide to start beating women.
In an elevator, right.
You know,
Especially the way it was.
I mean, the way it was.
Hard.
You know, I look what she did. I mean, she was, you know, assaulting him, which is no excuse by any means. You don't hit a woman at all. But I think from their standpoint, it's not the first or the last time that has happened.
So let's talk about Janae Rice, who was a victim but ended up also apologizing for her role in the attack. Why do so many people end up blaming the victim?
Well, I think in this country you have this sort of misogynistic, anti-feminist mentality, and it just trickles down to these women who are victims who feel that I could have done something else. It's my fault.
Right.
And you know what? When I saw some of the video after they were. You know, arrested, after Ray Rice was arrested, I think they had her in handcuffs too. I didn't understand why she was ever in handcuffs.
Yeah,
that was terrible.
Right.
I mean, the woman could have had a terrible concussion. She could have had brain damage.
John, what do you think?
You know, earlier this year, George Will said that being a rape victim is a coveted status on campus.
Right.
And he still gets to have a job after saying that.
Right.
And we are in this blame a victim mentality and culture where it's magnified when being sympathetic to the victim can cost your boss some dollars.
Right.
Again, this is another case where, you know, we look at Ferguson, we look at Staten Island, we look at Cosby, we look at Ray Rice. We see, what do they have in common? Well, it's black people in trouble. Okay,
Right.
black men in trouble. But in all cases, we see the black men with money walk. The black men who have no power and jaywalk and sell loose cigarettes are dead now.
Yeah. Right.
So again, there's many, many layers to this, not just race. And ultimately, the NFL, I think, is to be derided for not caring about this. For Roger Goodell, who does about as much as a human appendix, turning a blind eye to the abuse of women. And if you're with a man, ladies, who wants to blame Janae Rice more than Ray Rice, it's time to find the exit. Because this is contagious, this kind of thinking, and it's got to be shut down.
And you have to look at it like this. People will always say, well, she married him, so she must like it, or she must, you know, be used to it. So, of course, they're going to blame her. Well, look, she married him, so, of course, you know, it's nothing to it.
But she loves him, and again, just like Camille Cosby, just like Hillary Clinton, I'm not going to besmirch anyone for honoring their wedding vows and forgiving their partner.
Right. And hopefully, maybe it could be something that you can work on. So let's turn to the issue of child abuse, right? So you have, for which Adrian Peterson was indicted and given an indefinite unpaid suspension from the NFL. How should your employer be allowed to police your personal life? And you kind of touched on that for a second, Vincent.
Well, I don't think the Peterson case was child abuse. I mean, I'm not going to say my age, but 30 years ago, my grandmother was spanking me with a switch. You know, I mean, it was discipline. Did it leave marks? Absolutely. But I think Peterson was more the victim of the whole Ray Rice incident. Like, oh, this is happening in the NFL. We have to do something now. We have to do something. I mean, the thing about Peterson, he admitted it. Yes, I did spank my child with the switch. He did this, and I disciplined.
And my grandmother spanked me with the switch.
Exactly.
And so on
and that would have been
on.
me as well. You know, I can't tell you how many times I went to a call, you know, someone called the police to say, well, I got to discipline my child.
But is it a wake-up call, maybe, again, for the community as a whole? And when I say community, I'm talking about the African-American community in terms of changing some of its values that have been passed down through the generations
Gwendolyn,
and generations.
No, I don't think so. I think what happened with Peterson, with the hitting of the child with the switch, I think it was a little bit too extreme I mean,
Right.
a lot of people that are African American, they've been, whipped with switches and whatnot. But, when you start seeing bruises on the genitals of the child and, bruises and marks that aren't going to go away, I think it was a little bit too much. But I think the NFL does have a responsibility. And I think the responsibility they have is to do more life coaching instead of
Right.
just focusing on the athletics. Here you have these kids that are just out of college and all they know is football. And you know what? They're playing football because some of them, they just want to get out of the hood. They want to be
Right.
able to buy their mom and dad a house.
Right.
They want to be able to live.
Yep.
And so they're not prepared.
So
and when
it's
they get to
changing
the
the
NFL,
mentality. That's what I'm talking about.
But
Absolutely.
I think that one of the fundamental differences between these guys and just an average person who has, another kind of employment situation is that these people are celebrities. And so, I mean, do you think it's right for celebrities to be put on a different platform? I mean, are they role models in some ways and therefore they should be punished by their employers in addition to whatever happens in the court of law?
Well, as long as people want to be rich and famous and successful, celebrities will be role models whether we like it or not.
Right.
The fact is that if Adrian Peterson had run a dogfighting ring where animals were massacred, he'd be back playing now.
Right.
And I can't really comment on issues of child abuse and how in the black community what's cultural, just like in the white community. Some people think it's fine, some
Right.
don't.
Right.
But the fact is, if this was going to cost the NFL money, he'd be out. If it wasn't going to cost the NFL money, he'd be
gonna
playing.
stay, right.
And at the end of the day, that's the professional level we're working at here.
Right.
Which is why I think the NFL has an overwhelming responsibility to try to educate these new players coming in, making sure that I think they do have a responsibility to police these
Right.
new employees
And
coming in.
I would agree with that. I mean, you have to look. They go from ashy to classy.
Absolutely,
Right,
that's
right.
right.
As soon as the draft is in, and
Right.
you don't leave that mentality behind. If you're not coached to say, okay, this is what you need to do. This is how you need to spend
So-
your money. This is who you need to associate with.
So
you
part of
lose
the
that.
solution then is to give that pre-education.
Absolutely.
And there, what else would be a
Absolutely.
solution?
Absolutely.
What else?
Well, I also think that they probably need to strengthen some of the contracts that they
Right.
have with these, employees to make sure that they know what the boundaries are.
Right.
I mean, they are at-will employees, and you think they have a lot of leeway, but you have these issues that keep cropping up,
And
morals
and
clauses
also
and such?
morals
Moral
clauses,
clauses.
and also the
I would
issues
also
of whether
say-
or not you've been punished twice.
Right.
A lot of these
Double
contracts
jeopardy,
do
yeah.
not have the Fifth Amendment double jeopardy
Right.
And I would say
protections,
even
but they do have something
background.
similar to it.
Right.
Yeah, even background. I mean, look at Aaron Hernandez.
Right.
I mean, he was trouble in college, but they still
still
took him
s-
in.
right.
Yeah.
And look where he is now. So if you start looking at backgrounds and saying, I mean, if I apply for a job, the first thing they're going to do is check my resume. They're going to check my background,
Right.
criminal history and everything. So when you allow someone like Aaron Hernandez to come in the league, you get what you pay for in the end.
Right.
But you know what? Aaron Hernandez might have been produced in college, but had he had,
The
maybe
fundamental-
the fundamental
right.
things in college, I think in college, that's where it starts. They're
Right.
ignoring the mind, and they're basically just focusing on how fast can this guy run, instead of making sure
Right.
that they're
Right.
making good decisions.
Well, I think the good news is they have beefed up their domestic violence policies. So
Yes.
at least the dialogue was created because of these terribly unfortunate incidents. We have more to talk about with our guests. Coming up, our panel has their say. They'll share with us their most notable headlines from 2014. Stay tuned. You're watching Arise and Shine. Welcome back to Arise and Shine. Let's take one last look at today's headlines. Shahan?
Thanks, Priya. Here's what you need to know. New details are emerging about the passengers on board the missing Air Asia plane. 17 children, including one infant, were among the 162 people flying from Indonesia to Singapore. Officials say they lost track of the plane after the pilot asked to change course to bad weather. The authorities have halted the search until sunrise. This is the second missing plane crisis gripping Southeast Asia in less than a year. Paul Chapman has more.
At Surabaya Airport in Indonesia, from where AirAsia flight QZ8501 took off on Sunday, worried relatives were waiting for news of its fate. The aircraft lost contact with traffic controllers after the pilots asked to fly higher to avoid bad weather. There were at least 162 passengers and crew on board. Most were Indonesian. The airline says there were also 3 South Koreans and 1 each from Singapore and Malaysia. Indonesian transport officials say the plane disappeared between the port town of Tanjung Pandan and Pontianak town on Borneo. They said no distress signal was sent. The airline and Indonesia's Air Force are searching for the aircraft. Singapore says it's also mobilised its Air Force and Navy to help.
In another developing story, choppy seas and strong winds are hampering rescue efforts in Greece, where hundreds of people are trapped on a burning ferry. The fire apparently started on the deck as the vessel was heading to a port in Italy. Emergency helicopters and ships have been dispatched to the area. So far, more than 100 of the 525 people on board have been evacuated. No deaths have been reported. Flooding continues to cause havoc in Southeast Asia. More than 10 people have been killed and around 160,000 displaced in Malaysia. And across the border in Thailand, 14 people have been killed in floods that began in mid-December.
As residents in southern Thailand pull themselves to safety, officials warn that more flooding is on the way. Forecasters predict that the northeast monsoon will intensify in the coming days. In Yala, local authorities are preparing for rising water levels by reinforcing defenses. The floods have already affected more than 184,000 households and displaced nearly 8,000 people. Across Thailand's southern border, the number of people evacuated in northeastern peninsular Malaysia has jumped. More than 160,000 people have been evacuated as of Saturday, up from 100,000 on Friday. And with more rain on the way, that number is likely to increase.
The United States and NATO formally ended its 13-year mission in Afghanistan today. American and allied troops have been there since 2001. The occupation was a direct response to the September 11th attacks in the United States. Starting January 1st, the U.S.-led force will transition to a supportive role. Approximately 11,000 U.S. soldiers will stay behind to assist Afghanistan's armed forces, a somewhat small figure compared to 2010, when 140,000 American soldiers were based in that country. And here's a really absurd story. Public caning could become law in the Aceh province in Indonesia. This as lawmakers consider criminalizing gay sex. If passed, Indonesia's central government is not likely to make it a national law, but it doesn't have the power to strike it down if approved. In 2006, provinces were given the right to implement a version of Islamic Sharia law. Gay rights groups are, of course, unhappy.
Alah lagi kapan?
There's no restriction on living together, but it'll be a problem if they're married, he says. Getting married with the same sex is forbidden in Quran and Sharia law. However, if two people of the same sex are not married, they can live, eat, work and even sleep together in the same bed, as long as there's no sexual intercourse. Sharia law allows that.
So sad and so ridiculous. Back to you
Yeah,
guys.
it really is.
The world is changing. Crazy. That's all.
Jinx. I mean, well, thanks, Shahan. We've been talking about some of the biggest stories that made the headlines in 2014. Now we want to turn it over to our panel. What was the story that meant the most to you guys this year? John, let's start with you.
I think one of the most interesting stories to blend religion and politics here was the Hobby Lobby case, where they did not want to pay for birth control for some of their female employees, despite the fact that that's compensation under religious grounds, despite the fact that the Bible does not actually prohibit any kind of contraception.
Right.
I've read the Bible cover to cover. At no point does the Almighty ever say, "Thou shalt not wear a Jimmy hat." And it shows that Scalia law is a distant cousin of Sharia law when you can have conservative religion controlling social policy, especially when you consider the hypocrisy that Hobby Lobby outsourced its manufacturing to China, where abortions are mandatory. So they're really pro some life. So I do think that if we now live in a country where you can ignore laws because of your religion, you're move Rastafarians.
And Gwendolyn, so
Well,
what for you was the most fascinating story?
I think unquestionably it's the Ebola story and the
that's a big
Tracy
one.
Hickox situation.
Right.
This was a nurse who's from Maine who basically she went to West Africa to do a good thing. She went to help people.
Yes.
She was not symptomatic. She was detained in Newark by Chris Christie. And I think that it's a very scary,
She didn't bring
scary
any Krispy
situation.
Kremes.
But you know, I think it's scary because she was not symptomatic, and it just shows how your constitutional rights can be stripped away.
But
And what if she were a poor black woman from West Africa without a voice? She had access to funds, she had access to media outlets, but I think this is a very dangerous precedent, and which is why I think the New York governor backed away. Now, I think that what they could do, you can, because there is an incubation period of 21 days,
Yes. Right.
you can certainly, demand that they're tested every day, whether it's by blood or by saliva, but what you cannot do is unilaterally just take away someone's
Someone's right.
But you know
constitutional
what?
right
She
to freedom.
got on her bicycle and said, I'm going to pedal away. She didn't, she said that this
I'm not
isn't
gonna let
But
it
she
stop me.
wasn't
Yeah.
symptomatic when
Right.
she was
Right.
pedaling away.
Well, right, but my point is
Absolutely.
that compared to all the other people who came back, she actually did stand up and say, this is not okay. You can't treat the Ebola workers
Absolutely.
like this. So that
and
was
I
kind of
think she
interesting,
did a
too.
great thing.
Yeah.
I think she did.
I think she was a
Ebola
little
versus-
snotty, but other than that, I think she-
Not as high as the
Right.
Ebola
That's
illiterates.
true.
Well, and I think it's really cool that Time Magazine had their Person of the Year as
Yes.
the Ebola workers. I
Yes.
think that was
Well,
really
this
a
year we
nice
just
tribute.
made a lot
learned
of sense.
Ebola is Latin for ratings.
Right, exactly.
All right, Vincent, what about you?
I would say the Michael Dunn case, the loud music down in
Right.
Florida. It was compared to the Trayvon Martin case in the
Right.
sense that the stand your ground law was used as a defense. But,
Right.
There were some differences. You had George Zimmerman, who was the only witness to that shooting.
Right.
But you had several witnesses to the shooting of
right.
Jordan Davis. And you have to look at his actions. He fired into the vehicle. As the vehicle's fleeing, he's shooting into the vehicle.
Right.
And then he leaves and goes to the hotel room to order a pizza. So
Very
I think
callous.
just, very callous.
Which is very, like, sociopathic.
It just plays into his mindset. Like,
Right.
what kind of individual are we dealing with to
Right.
order a pizza after you just killed someone?
I'm guessing
you know?
he never opened fire on loud country music.
Right. Yeah. So when I look at that case, I mean, that could have been me, 30 years ago when I was playing loud music. It's
Right.
like,
Right,
wow.
exactly.
That could
could
be
happen to
today. I
anybody.
still play that.
But I think the good thing about that case too was that it showed that it's not always that the white man gets off the hook in these sort of stories.
Justice was
Right.
definitely served in that case.
Yeah, and
But we were all wondering how it would be
Yeah,
served. At
because
first,
the
we're
first
little-
time they had the
it is
mistrial,
Florida,
and
right.
they had to retry him. So
Right.
there was that question, like, okay, is he going to go to jail for this?
Right.
or-
Is this going to happen?
I have to tell you
I
guys.
think, I hate to bring it back, that's because I think it was about racism.
Right.
Right.
And also about the fact that you had a predominantly white jury that
Right.
really sympathized with Michael Dunn in a case as stupendous as this.
Well, and it's Florida again. I
Absolutely.
thought he was reaching for something,
Yes.
but he was reaching
Yeah.
for a tape deck.
So
Tape
I can
decks
stand
don't
my
exist
ground.
anymore.
And
Right.
this is whole psychology of because you are black black, you have black skin, and you're a male,
Right.
you are dangerous. So the
Right.
person in their head, because they happen to be racist
Right.
and afraid in their mind, they can act out on it and they don't have to go to jail.
So much,
I think that's scary.
So much right now about, like I said, in the world, 2014 is ending on, racial injustice and just in, our law enforcement, things we need to work on.
But I think it's an exciting time.
It is
because